Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
Mary had a little man.
The fall. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your
Nobody
mind.
knows George Papadopoulos, who is cooperating with the FBI. Nobody knows him. Remember that, okay? Nobody.
A lot of people are volunteers, right? Manafort was a volunteer. And let's put the picture up. We'll get it up at some point. I don't see any coffee being passed around by Papadopoulos when he's sitting between the President of the United States and Jeff Sessions. I'm not saying that he was the key to the campaign, but he was important enough, Mike, that when he started emailing about this stuff, he got the ear of Sam Clovis. He got Manafort communicating with Gates about the suggestions and what to do about them. That is not what you do when a coffee boy asks you to do something. I get the spin, but the reality is Manafort certainly took it more seriously than you do.
Well, Manafort had to. If the Russians were trying to get into the campaign through this low-level volunteer staffer, he was there to rebuff it, as he did in the emails, as you noted earlier in the show. Paul Manafort pushed back and said the president is not going to be having any of these kind of meetings. And anyone who interprets that exchange between Paul and Rick Gates via email as saying that Paul was sending a lower-level staffer to meetings with Russians doesn't understand the English language. Clearly, he was saying that a lower-level staffer needed to communicate with these people and tell them these meetings were not going to happen. I think the Papadopoulos indictment and guilty plea shows that Paul Manafort and the Trump campaign were rebuffing these kinds of attempts of junior level people like Papadopoulos trying to work outside of the scope of his work description for the campaign.
It would be easier to accept that premise if there were an additional fact that we don't have. And we'll do it by way of example, okay? I call you up, we're working in a campaign together. Imagine that, Mike. So I say to you, there's a guy from Russia. He says he's got these emails that they stole from Hillary Clinton, and he wants to give them to me. What do you think? I think we should meet with him. What would you say?
Well, I would say at that point that this is an inappropriate contact if it's with a Russian government official.
No. This is somebody who knows that they can get them. The point is, your mind immediately goes to, this smells terrible. Stay away from it, and maybe I should do something about it. We didn't see that from Manafort.
Right, the kid was 27 years old.
Oh, now he's 27.
Whatever he is, you guys had him at the table.
You're trying to ascribe to him. You're trying to ascribe to him the ability to discern what's right and what's wrong in a campaign.
I'm putting that on Manafort.
When he's barely old enough.
I'm putting that on Manafort.
Oh, I understand that. And Paul Manafort pushed back.
But he didn't tell anybody. He didn't pick up the phone and say, "Hey, FBI, somebody's trying to push up on our campaign. They're saying they have stolen emails, and it's supposedly a Russian
intermediary." We don't know that he did that. You're right.
You're right. The kid keeps getting younger and younger, the coffee boy, okay? And by the way, this coffee boy traveled to Israel on behalf of the Trump campaign. This coffee boy gave an interview to the Jerusalem Post on behalf of the Trump campaign. This coffee boy met with the ambassador at the London embassy for the Trump campaign. This coffee boy also met with Greek officials on behalf of the Trump campaign. This coffee boy has suddenly gone from being 30 years old to 27 years old. In another interview, he's 29 years old. I want to know, how old is Jared Kushner? And he's in charge of Middle East peace and the Secretary of Everything, right? And who the hell is Corey Lewandowski, who was the campaign manager prior? Corey Lewandowski came after being a mid-level operative at Americans for Prosperity, working for, what's his face? Dick Armey. Dick freaking Armey? That was his experience. He had no experience. Manafort had never run a campaign. Corey Lewandowski had never run a campaign. No one in Trump world had ever run a campaign. Steve Bannon had never run a campaign. They all came from, the butthole of Washington. All of them were working at think tanks or the Heritage Foundation or Americans for Prosperity or Tea Party freaks from Tea Party freaks for patriotism or whatever their title, I mean, these were all nobodies because the Trump campaign could not get anybody to work for them. Steve Schmidt, who ran John McCain's 2008 campaign, said it was like a rogues gallery, the political version of the Island of Misfit Toys from the Christmas movie. There was nobody of any weight running the Trump campaign. This is why Trump does photo ops with freaking old ass Henry Kissinger. He's got gravitas. I mean, it's crazy. So this is, and Caputo is saying nobody knew him. He was 27 years old. He was a coffee boy who traveled to Italy for the Trump campaign, who traveled to Israel for the Trump campaign, who went to the London embassy for the Trump campaign, who met with Greek embassy officials for the Trump campaign. He was a coffee boy. What was he, bringing coffee to all these ambassadors and embassy personnel? Give me a freaking break. Trump was surrounded by neophytes. Trump was surrounded by amateurs. That was part of his bragging rights. That was part of his claim to fame. Look what I could do with these ragtag misfits where Hillary, she's spending all this money and I'm spending nothing. Turns out the Russians were spending on his behalf. Okay? It's just so sad. Anyway, Caputo says, Manafort pushed back. And, he should have called the FBI and he should have said something, but he didn't. You're right about that. He didn't. But the proof of the Russian cooperation and the offer of cooperation and the acceptance of the offer is Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting at Trump Tower with the freaking Russians. Natalia Veselnitskaya is a Russian government lawyer who was presenting the Trump campaign with talking points that came from the Kremlin, that came from Vladimir Putin through Yuri Chaika, his attorney general. I mean, this is ridiculous. And when Cuomo points this out, he just says, he was just a child.
You find your answer in Don Jr. Don Jr., what did he say when he was given the same solicitation? Awesome.
Right,
I want to meet
Don
with
Jr. approached. Chris, hold 1 second. Don Jr. approached it the same way that the 27-year-old naive kid did, and said that's a meeting that we should have. And Paul Manafort and others showed up because he was the son of the candidate, and it was a meeting that shouldn't have happened, and devolved very quickly, and everybody left. And it's been revealed in emails and all of the document production that's necessary for these investigations, and we'll get to the bottom of it. I think that the Don Jr. meeting needs to be looked into in its entirety,
you think?
Just like Papadopoulos needed to be looked into in his entirety. But unfortunately, for those who really want to see the president go down for this, the wiretap possibility for George Papadopoulos is laughable at best, because all you're going to get is tapes of him and his barista talking about what's for coffee.
It's barista. A barista is a English attorney. It's barista. They read the talking points. They don't even say it in front of a mirror, before they go on the TV. But this kid is getting younger and younger and younger, and he's getting more and more cups of coffee for more and more foreign embassy officials, the Greeks, the British, the Israelis. Unfortunately, there are interviews that he gave on the. This is sad.
That as it may, why would Mueller invest the time in a cooperation agreement with somebody who's so meaningless?
Really?
I can't ascribe anything to.
But I'm saying it defeats your premise a little bit, does it not?
Yeah, a little bit.
They wouldn't give this guy a deal and want to work with him if he was nothing.
But if you don't have anything else, you work with what you got. And George Papadopoulos is not going to be able to.
You got him on a felony, and you just indicted 2 other guys on a number of felonies.
You would think that's news.
You don't have anything else?
That have nothing to do with Papadopoulos, that has nothing to do with Russians, has nothing at all to do with the Trump campaign.
Oh, for Pete's sake, for the love of Jesus. It has nothing to do with the Trump campaign, except that we have emails that Manafort wrote to the Russians saying, I will be happy to brief you on the campaign. He wrote to Oleg Deripaska and said, maybe I could use my position on the Trump campaign as the Trump campaign manager to make us whole, because Oleg Deripaska was suing Paul Manafort for millions of dollars that Paul Manafort received from Oleg Deripaska for work that Oleg Deripaska felt Manafort did not do. And there's a lawsuit, a live one, still going on in the Cayman Islands. And Manafort is writing freaking emails to Oleg Deripaska through an intermediary in Kiev who works for his lobby shop, saying, hey, tell Oleg I got the caviar. I mean, they're talking in code. I got the most luxurious caviar now. And maybe I could use my position to make us whole again. I mean, it has nothing to do with the campaign. This was going on during the campaign. And Manafort did attend the Trump Jr. meeting, which was a meeting of Russians and government officials from Russia. Official documents passed from the Kremlin to Natalia Veselnitskaya to the hands of one Donald Trump Jr. And Jared, who's what? 30, maybe he's 32. I don't know. Maybe the more I talk about him today, the younger I'll make Jared. And then, just as a joke, we'll put him in charge of Middle East peace. Oh, my God. These people are such freaking liars.
You just said the campaign, but then you said the president or the senior staff. I would include Manafort in that. You've got an email exchange with Manafort who wasn't looking to blow the whistle on this stuff. It was negotiating whether or not to have a specific meeting. And certainly,
and which he pushed back on and said, no, we're not having the meeting.
And then he had it.
Apparently so in that one email.
What you're doing is indict.
No, I'm not indicting anybody. Mueller just did that. What I'm saying is that Papadopoulos was certainly part of the campaign. So to say this doesn't touch on the campaign...
I push back on that completely. I've never heard of Papadopoulos until his name was in the media. I never saw him.
Why is he sitting at the table with the president of the United States and Jeff Sessions?
He had one meeting with the president.
There he is.
One meeting with the president. And I can tell you, if photographs with President Trump are proof of some kind of collusion, there are 500,000 photos for you to look at through the campaign.
But
and Papadopoulos was just at a drop-by meeting.
He's an excellent guy. When he reached out with these suggestions, the campaign didn't blow the whistle on him. They didn't call and say, this guy's a nobody, he's a kook, get rid of him.
No, what the president was doing when the Washington Post asked him was he was reading from a list, because all we have is audio of that meeting. He was reading from a list. In that list were many other people the president hadn't met yet, including Papadopoulos. And to think that a 27-year-old amateur foreign policy analyst is someone that's going to rise to the top of the Trump campaign defies credulity. I have no idea why people would think that a volunteer coffee boy like George Papadopoulos would get to the top of this campaign.
Well, first
it's
of all,
wishful thinking,
Michael,
and it's going to be proven wrong.
Michael, look, I respect the argument, but other than Manafort, you had a bunch of nobodies around the president during this campaign. It was part of the success story of how he made it so far against seasoned professionals with a ragtag group of people who had never been at the upper echelons of the game. So I don't know about that argument.
I don't know about that argument either, because let's look at Steve Bannon. Did he have any experience running a campaign? Did he have any experience in foreign policy? Did he have any experience at all in politics? No, he was a radio talk show host who got $10 million from the Mercer family to take over the Breitbart website, a dead man's website, and turn it into a right-wing, uber-nationalist, Pepe people sort of a disinformation rag on the internet. Okay, that's who Steve Bannon is. Corey Lewandowski, did he have any political experience, any foreign policy? And how old is Corey Lewandowski? 30, 31? How old is Jared? Let's make him 29 for the purpose of the campaign, okay? And he's in charge of Middle East peace. I mean, no, this is so unbelievable how they pull out this one person who's been not just indicted, but pled guilty to lying to the FBI about invitations and acceptance of invitations from Russian foreign government nationals linked directly to the Kremlin, saying, oh, well, Manafort didn't want the meeting. He didn't want the meeting, except there was a meeting and Manafort was at a meeting. And he sent the president's son and Jared Kushner, who's also, 25? Go to RandiRhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.